Hello, today we are going to be discussing the first part of Module 3, Child Development. Childhood is typically defined as the period from birth to puberty. Beginning as infants, then toddlers, and then becoming children, there are many domains of development that children interact and encounter as they age. Several of these domains include physical, cognitive, social, emotional, and language gains, but these gains and skills will vary across age. For this module, we will be focusing on cognitive development in childhood. Cognitive development refers to the development of thinking across the lifespan and includes many functions such as problem solving, strategizing, reasoning, planning, and organizing. Many of these cognitive functions are associated with key developmental periods, so today we will be further discussing the principles underlying this domain of development, as well as the theories that seek to explain them. First, we have the principle of nature versus nurture. As discussed last week, this debate centers on how much of our development is due to our genetic predispositions and how much is the result of our environmental influences. Developmental psychology believes that it is an interaction of both. Nurture acts upon what nature endows. With this being said, there are many ways in which nature and nurture can interact to shape children's cognitive development. There are more basic functions of development, such as depth perception, that can be altered by both influences. For example, if a child has a condition that inhibits their sight like cataracts or blindness and it is not corrected, they might not form depth perception if they don't acquire the skill in the proper sensitive period, even if the original problem itself has been corrected. Parents can also influence their child's cognitive development through interaction and stimulation. Parental affection, acting in response to the child's inherent demeanor, can influence a child's cognitive development through attention. Furthermore, a parent could encourage their child's passion for an activity, such as reading or cooking, which can confer continuous benefits onto the child's development. This, however, is contingent upon the parent's own interest for the child, as they have almost exclusive say in what activities their child will participate in. The next principle of development we will discuss is the idea of discontinuous versus continuous development. Continuous development believes that development occurs gradually. Skills build on one another and are augmented over time. So the idea of babies and toddlers first crawling, and then standing, and then walking. Discontinuous development, on the other hand, believes that stages represent qualitative differences in development that can emerge suddenly at specific times. So a caterpillar turning into a butterfly, or a child becoming an adolescent at the onset of puberty. And like the debate with nature versus nurture, wherein we can understand them as an interaction of both, this principle of development is really based in the idea of it depends on how you look at it and how often that you look. Next up, we will be discussing some key developmental theories surrounding cognitive development in childhood. For our first developmental theory, we will be discussing Piaget's stage theory. In this theory, children actively construct knowledge as they manipulate and explore their world. This theory is broken into 4 stages. First, sensory motor, which is from birth to about 2 years old, followed by pre-operational reasoning from 2 to 7 years old. This is then followed by concrete operational reasoning from 7 to 11 years old, and this theory is concluded with formal operational reasoning from ages 12 and up. In the first stage of sensory motor, we have infants experiencing the world around them and trying to understand the different objects and environment they're surrounded by. So a way that infants interact with their world is through touch and sight, but there are several limitations to this stage. For example, infants do not yet have the ability to find an object if it is removed from them. So object permanence, someone would take a glass, cover it with a box, and the infant would believe that the object, the glass in this case, ceases to exist. In the pre-operational reasoning stage, the child is developing symbolic thinking, and this is often when language development occurs, and so the child is able to look at the glass and say, that is water. This is followed by the concrete operational reasoning stage, wherein children are able to apply logic, but only when things are tangible. So for example, if a child has 2 glasses of water with the exact same amount, but one is poured into a taller glass, they might think that it is different if they were in the pre-operational stage and the taller glass was larger, but now in the concrete operational stage, the child is able to determine that the two glasses are the same with regards to the amount of water in them. Finally, in the formal operational reasoning stage, children become capable of abstract thought. They're able to understand concepts beyond just how much water is in the glass or this is water, but they are able to think about whether or not the water is half empty or half full. And so they develop this more complex thinking that goes beyond just what is in front of them. So this begs the question, is development continuous or discontinuous? Now, Piaget's stage theory follows a more discontinuous principle, but recently researchers have begun to hypothesize that there are certain functions that are continuous within Piaget's developmental theory. Here's just a table to show the different periods of cognitive development as well as the different gains that children experience, but also by the different tests that you can use to identify whether or not children are in one developmental stage versus another. So for example, from 2 to 6 years old, we have children expanding upon their imagination, experience growing, and child decenters themselves from the rest of the world, so they're able to understand that there are more individuals around them who have thoughts and feelings. This differs from birth to 2 years, but in the same way, a 7 to 11-year-old child will understand the difference between the two glasses of water, but they can also more concretely understand numbers, ideas, classifications beyond the symbolic thinking that they have been developed from 2 to 6 years old. Another developmental theory we will be discussing is Vygotsky's sociocultural theory, and in this theory, culture really influences the child's development, and this is through the values, beliefs, customs, and skills of that child's culture. But we also have what is called the zone of proximal development. And so in this theory, there are certain things that the child can do by themselves, there are certain things that they can do with help, and there are certain things that they can do they cannot do without, even with help. So we require social interaction to get the child from the I can do this by myself to I can do this with help. But there are also other sources of information that children can use to get to the stage of I can do this with help. So we have not just others, but information and tools. Next is information processing theory. And so in this theory, sensory information is received by the child, interpreted, and then applied to future interactions. So the child will rehearse it in their short-term memory, and this will be consolidated into their long-term memory, which they can then use to call upon the next time they encounter a stimuli that is similar to the first that caused them to receive the sensory information. Lastly, we're going to discuss the applications between cognitive development and early childhood education. There are several core cognitive skills that can later predict achievement as children enter formal schooling. For example, phonemic awareness is critical in predicting kindergarten reading abilities, but also experience with Chutes and Ladders, a game that involves counting and familiarity with numbers, can go on to predict later math achievement. However, some children may be at a disadvantage depending on their environment at home, such as family socioeconomic status or parental stress, because their parents may not have the ability or access to provide their children with these supplemental stimuli that can help them and set them up for greater success as they enter school. That's it for today. Next, we will be discussing adolescent development.